Picture this. You're 67 years old and sitting in a mansion worth millions, but every room echoes with emptiness. You've mourned the death of 2 husbands, divorced 2 others, and at 68, you're wondering if love is just something that happens to other people. Your children live their own lives in distant cities, calling on holidays with voices that sound more dutiful than caring. The silence is so thick, and desperation has become your closest companion. This is the story of Eleanor Mitchell, a woman who learned that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who whisper sweet nothings in your ear, while calculating the exact moment your heart will stop beating. Eleanor wasn't always rich. Born in the tobacco fields of North Carolina, she'd spent her childhood with dirt under her fingernails and dreams bigger than the small town that tried to contain her. Smart and twice as determined, she clawed her way through nursing school, married a prominent surgeon, and learned that money could buy everything except the one thing she craved most: genuine love. Her first husband, Dr. Robert Mitchell, died at 44 from a massive heart attack, leaving Eleanor with a life insurance payout and a medical practice worth more than most people see in a lifetime. She was 35, beautiful, and suddenly very wealthy. Marriage number 2 was to a real estate mogul who doubled her fortune before alcohol claimed him. The third was a federal judge who provided respectability, but died peacefully in his sleep after 6 years of comfortable but passionless marriage. The fourth was her biggest mistake, a smooth-talking consultant, 15 years her junior, who walked away with half her assets, and a lesson that age gaps could be expensive. Now, at 68, Eleanor lived alone in her sprawling estate in Charlotte, North Carolina. 12 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, and a bank account that could buy a small country, but she traded all for someone to share morning coffee with. Her children, successful in their own right, had long since stopped worrying about her romantic misadventures. They figured she'd learned her lesson. They were wrong. It was a sleepless Tuesday night when Eleanor found herself scrolling through sugarconnect.com, a dating site for mature women seeking younger companionship. She'd created her profile at 2 a.m., lying about her age by 8 years and telling uncomfortable truths about her wealth. Successful entrepreneur seeks genuine connection with younger man. Age is just a number. Financial security not an issue. Looking for someone who knows how to treat a woman like a queen. The responses flooded in within hours. Most were obvious scammers, boys young enough to be her grandsons, asking for gift cards and plane tickets. But one message stood out from the digital noise. Hello, beautiful. My name is Ryan, and I'm 35 years old. I work in commercial construction, and I believe that a real connection transcends age. I'd love to take you to dinner and show you that chivalry isn't dead. A woman of your caliber deserves to be treated like royalty. Ryan Davidson's profile picture showed a man who looked like he'd been carved from marble. 6 feet of solid muscle, piercing blue eyes, and a smile that could melt steel. He described himself as a construction foreman, single father to a 7-year-old daughter named Sophie, and someone looking for something real with a woman who knows her worth. Their first date was at the most expensive restaurant in Charlotte. Ryan arrived in a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, but Eleanor didn't question it. He opened doors, pulled out chairs, and listened to her stories like they were the most fascinating things he'd ever heard. "You're not like other women I've dated," he said over dessert, his calloused hand covering her manicured one. "You're confident, sophisticated. You know who you are and what you want. That's incredibly attractive." Eleanor felt her cheeks flush. When was the last time someone had called her attractive? When had someone last looked at her like she was a woman instead of a walking bank statement? The check came to $380. Ryan reached for his wallet, but Eleanor waved him away. "Please, this is my treat. I can't let you pay for everything," he protested. "Honey," she said, the endearment slipping out before she could stop it, "I asked you out. This one's on me. How about I take you somewhere special next time?" Ryan asked. "I know a little place that has the best jazz music and wine selection in the state." There was going to be a next time. Eleanor thought loudly. They dated for 4 months before she invited him to move in. 4 months of candlelit dinners, long drives through the North Carolina mountains, and Ryan telling her she was beautiful, intelligent, perfect. 4 months of feeling like a desirable woman instead of a lonely widow with too much money and too much empty space. "I don't want to rush anything," Ryan said when she offered him the guest wing of her mansion. "But my lease is up next month, and Sophie needs a stable place to stay when she visits." "Bring her too," Eleanor said without hesitation. "This house has been empty too long." That's how Ryan Davidson and his 7-year-old daughter Sophie moved into Eleanor's estate on Magnolia Drive. And that's when Eleanor learned the difference between love and performance art. Ryan was flawless. Too flawless. He never left dishes in the sink, never forgot to say please and thank you, never tracked mud through the house or left the toilet seat up. He brought her flowers every Friday and told her she was gorgeous even when she woke up looking like she'd been struck by lightning. But perfection, Eleanor began to realize, wasn't always genuine. She started noticing small things. The way Ryan's eyes went cold when he thought she wasn't watching. How he took phone calls in other rooms and spoke in hushed tones. The expensive clothes that kept appearing in his closet. Designer labels that cost more than a construction foreman should be able to afford. When she asked about it, Ryan had explanations for everything. "My ex-wife pays child support," he said about the money. "I've been saving for years." "My mom," he said about the secretive phone calls. "She worries about me dating someone so accomplished." Words like patience and almost there, and won't be much longer. Words that made his stomach churn and her heart crack. Still, she said nothing. Because saying something meant facing the truth. And the truth was something Eleanor wasn't ready for.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
Words like patience, almost there, and won't be much longer. Words that made his stomach churn and her heart crack. Still, she said nothing. Because saying something meant facing the truth. And the truth was something Eleanor wasn't ready for. The man Eleanor knew as Ryan Davidson was actually Tyler Brooks, and his story was very different from the one he presented. 3 arrests for fraud, 2 for identity theft, and an 18-month stint in county jail that had taught him valuable lessons about the American justice system. Rich people had money, poor people had nothing, and smart people figured out how to transfer wealth from one group to the other. Tyler had been running cons since he was 17. He'd started small, fake charity collections, credit card skimming, warranty scams, but what he wanted was the life-changing score, the one that would set him up permanently. That's when he discovered the world of sugar dating and the lonely women who populated it. Tyler had perfected his approach over 3 years and 7 different targets. He studied their profiles like a scientist, learned their weaknesses, their fears, their deepest desires. Then he became exactly what they needed. For the divorce teacher in Raleigh, he was a struggling artist who needed someone to believe in his talent. For the widowed restaurant owner in Asheville, he was a veteran with PTSD who needed someone to heal his broken heart. For the bitter socialite in Greensboro, he was a reformed bad boy who needed someone to save him from himself. Each relationship lasted just long enough to gain access to bank accounts, credit cards, or valuable assets. Then he disappeared, usually with enough money to last 6 months while he planned the next score. But Eleanor was different. Eleanor was the jackpot. Tyler had spent 2 weeks studying her before making contact. Her social media painted a picture of wealth and loneliness in equal measure. Photos of elaborate meals with only one place setting. Captions about looking forward to finding my person. Check-ins at expensive restaurants with comments like dining alone again. She was perfect. The Ryan Davidson persona was built specifically for her. Construction worker because she posted about appreciating men who work with their hands. Single father because she'd shared articles about the importance of strong male role models. Younger, but not too young. 35 was mature enough to seem serious, but young enough to make her feel special. Even the daughter was calculated. Tyler had borrowed Sophie from his sister, promising her $300 and a trip to Disney World if she played along. 7-year-old Sophie thought it was an elaborate game of pretend. She called Eleanor Miss Ellie and asked for bedtime stories that made the older woman's eyes well up with tears. "She's perfect," Eleanor told her friend Margaret over lunch at the country club. "Ryan is perfect. I feel like I'm living in a fairy tale." Tyler made sure she felt that way. He studied her routines, her preferences, her vulnerabilities. He learned that she liked her coffee black, that she watched classic movies on Sunday afternoons and cried during the romantic scenes, that she took heart medication every morning and sleeping pills every night. Most importantly, he learned about her money. Eleanor was worth $15 million, not counting real estate. Most of it was in diversified investments, but she kept $3 million in easily accessible accounts. She had no will, kept saying she needed to get around to it, which meant everything would go to her children when she died, unless she had a husband. In North Carolina, a surviving spouse automatically inherits a third of everything, regardless of any will. That's when Tyler's plan shifted from theft to something much more permanent. The proposal happened on a cold February evening, exactly 6 months after their first date. Tyler had spent the day setting the scene. Eleanor came home from her book club to find him waiting in the living room, down on one knee with a ring that had cost him $20,000 of her own money. "Eleanor Catherine Mitchell," he said, his voice shaking with what she thought was emotion but was actually adrenaline. "You've made me the happiest man alive. Will you marry me?" Eleanor said yes before he finished the question. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the estate, with Sophie as their flower girl and a justice of the peace who asked no uncomfortable questions. The honeymoon was 2 weeks in Tuscany, where Eleanor posted pictures of herself and her handsome husband on every social media platform she had. The comments were mixed. Congratulations from acquaintances, concerns from friends, and conspicuous silence from her children. But Eleanor didn't care. She was married to a man who loved her, who chose her, who made her feel alive again. What she didn't know was that her new husband had already started planning her funeral. Marriage changed everything, but not in the way Eleanor expected. Ryan became attentive to the point of suffocation. He made her breakfast every morning, brought her medications with fresh orange juice, and watched her take them like a nurse monitoring a critical patient. "Just making sure my baby stays healthy," he said when she asked about the scrutiny. He took over the household finances to take stress off her shoulders. He hired a new accountant who asked fewer questions, opened joint bank accounts that required both signatures but somehow always had Ryan handling the paperwork. Eleanor noticed the changes but explained them away. This was what marriage looked like when you found the right person, someone who cared enough to handle everything, someone who loved you enough to worry about your health. But love wasn't what was making Ryan so attentive to her medication schedule. Eleanor took 3 pills every day, blood pressure medication, cholesterol medication, and a blood thinner prescribed after a minor heart episode 3 years earlier. The blood thinner was crucial. It prevented clots that could cause strokes or heart attacks. It also made her extremely vulnerable to bleeding. Tyler had spent countless hours researching Eleanor's medications, reading medical journals and online forums about drug interactions, overdoses, and side effects. What he learned was that too much blood thinner could be fatal, especially when combined with certain other substances. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Gradually increase her blood thinner dosage over several weeks, not enough to cause immediate symptoms but enough to thin her blood to dangerous levels. Then introduce a trigger, something that would cause internal bleeding that her compromised blood couldn't clot to stop. It would look like a medical emergency, a tragic accident, a woman whose heart medication couldn't save her from the inevitable. Tyler started by switching her pills. Eleanor took 5 milligrams of blood thinner daily. Tyler began giving her 15 milligrams, using pills he ordered from an online pharmacy that didn't require prescriptions. The pills looked identical. Eleanor never noticed. Within 2 weeks, she was bruising more easily. Small bumps that should have left no mark were leaving purple spots on her arms and legs. I must be getting old, she joked, showing Tyler a bruise on her wrist. Used to be I could bump into a wall and not even mark up. Maybe you should see the doctor, Tyler suggested, his voice full of false concern. For a few bruises. Honey, I'm 68 years old. My body's just doing what old bodies do. Tyler nodded sympathetically while mentally calculating how much longer he needed to wait. 3 weeks into the plan, Eleanor started having dizzy spells. She'd stand up too quickly and have to grab furniture to keep from falling. Twice she nearly collapsed while climbing the stairs. I think something's wrong with my medication, she told Tyler over dinner. I feel off. Want me to call your doctor? Tyler asked. No. I probably just need to adjust the dosage. I'll call tomorrow. But Tyler made sure she didn't make it to tomorrow. That night, after Eleanor took her sleeping pill and kissed him goodnight, Tyler waited until her breathing became deep and regular. Then he went to the kitchen and retrieved the bottle of aspirin he'd been keeping in the cabinet. Aspirin was a blood thinner too. Not as strong as Eleanor's prescription medication, but powerful enough when combined with the overdose she'd already been taking. Tyler crushed 20 aspirin tablets into powder, mixed it with a small amount of water, and added it to the orange juice he would serve her with breakfast. The combination of medications would thin her blood to the point where any internal bleeding would be unstoppable, and Tyler had already planned how to trigger that bleeding. Eleanor's morning routine was predictable. She woke at 6:30 a.m., went to the bathroom, then came downstairs for breakfast. She always wore slippers, soft-soled house shoes she'd had for years and refused to throw away despite Tyler's offers to buy her new ones. Those slippers were about to become the murder weapon. While Eleanor was in the bathroom, Tyler went to the top of the grand staircase and sprayed the 5th step with cooking oil. Just a light mist, enough to make the marble slippery but not enough to be obvious. Then he went back to the kitchen and waited. Eleanor came downstairs the same way she had every morning for the past year. She held the mahogany banister with her left hand and walked slowly, carefully. But when her slipper hit the oil on the 5th step, her foot shot out from under her. She tumbled down 18 marble steps, her head striking the banister twice and her body twisting in ways that human bodies weren't meant to twist. Tyler found her at the bottom of the staircase, conscious but bleeding from a gash on her head and complaining that she couldn't feel her legs. "Oh my God, Eleanor," he shouted, loud enough for the staff to hear. "What happened? Are you okay?" Eleanor tried to speak, but blood was filling her mouth. The combination of blood thinners and trauma from the fall was causing massive internal bleeding. Her compromised blood couldn't clot fast enough to stop it. Tyler called 911, performed CPR for the paramedics to see, and rode in the ambulance holding Eleanor's hand while she died. At the hospital, doctors worked for 4 hours trying to save her. But the bleeding was too severe, her blood too thin, her body too broken. Eleanor Mitchell died at 3:22 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, surrounded by machines that couldn't help her and a husband who had killed her. The cause of death was ruled accidental, traumatic brain injury and internal bleeding caused by a fall down the stairs. The medical examiner noted that her blood work showed elevated levels of blood thinner, but attributed it to medication error rather than foul play. Tyler cried at the funeral, real tears, because he'd actually grown fond of Eleanor in his own way, but not fond enough to choose her life over $5 million. Because that's what he inherited as her surviving spouse, $5 million, plus the estate, plus ownership stakes in 2 businesses. Everything Eleanor had worked for, saved for, lived for. Everything was his now. Tyler Brooks thought he was untouchable. He had a new identity, a dead wife, and more money than he'd ever dreamed of. The perfect crime, perfectly executed. But perfection has a way of creating its own problems. The first issue was Eleanor's children. David and Patricia Mitchell had been suspicious of Ryan from the beginning. Their mother had a history of questionable relationships, but this one felt different, more dangerous. They tried to talk to her about it during Christmas dinner, 6 weeks before she died. "Mom, you barely know this man," Patricia had said. "And now you're married to him. What's the rush?" The rush is that I'm 68 years old and I've wasted enough time being alone, Eleanor had replied. Ryan makes me happy. Isn't that what matters? What matters is that he might be after your money, David had added. Have you thought about that? Eleanor had gotten angry then, told them they were jealous, ungrateful, bitter, said they'd rather see her die alone than find happiness with someone they didn't approve of. It was the last real conversation they'd had before she died. Now, sitting in a lawyer's office hearing about their mother's estate, David and Patricia felt sick with guilt and rage. They'd been right about Ryan, but being right didn't bring their mother back. According to North Carolina law, the estate attorney explained, surviving spouses are entitled to 1/3 of the deceased's assets, regardless of any existing will. Since Mrs. Mitchell died without a will, and since she was legally married to Mr. Davidson, he inherits everything except for small statutory allowances for her children. Everything? Patricia asked, her voice barely a whisper. $5 million in liquid assets, plus the estate, plus ownership stakes in 2 businesses. I'm sorry for your loss, but the law is clear. David and Patricia left the lawyer's office knowing they'd lost more than their mother. They'd lost their inheritance, their family home, and their sense of justice. But they weren't ready to give up. The second issue was money itself. Tyler had thought that inheriting $5 million would solve all his problems. What he didn't realize was that having $5 million would create new ones. Large inheritances trigger automatic reviews by the IRS. Tyler's tax history as Ryan Davidson was thin, barely 2 years of construction worker wages. Suddenly inheriting millions of dollars raised red flags everywhere. Bank transfers over $10,000 require federal reporting. When Tyler tried to move money to offshore accounts, those transfers got flagged too. Most importantly, Tyler didn't understand the difference between being rich and acting rich. Within 4 months of Eleanor's death, he bought a $300,000 Lamborghini, or $800,000 penthouse in Miami, and a yacht he couldn't even pilot. He was spending money faster than he could hide it, leaving a trail that forensic accountants could follow from orbit. The investigation started small. A welfare check on a 7-year-old who'd been telling confused stories about her pretend stepmom. A tax audit on a construction worker who'd suddenly become a millionaire. A routine review of an accidental death involving an elderly woman and her much younger husband. But small investigations have a way of becoming big ones when they all point to the same person. David and Patricia Mitchell had hired a private investigator with their own money. What they discovered made their blood run cold. Ryan Davidson didn't exist before 2 years ago. No birth certificate, no school records, no employment history. The Social Security number belonged to a child who died in 1995. The construction company that supposedly employed him had no record of him. But Tyler Brooks did exist, and he had a very different kind of resume. The private investigator found 3 previous victims, all elderly women, all lonely, all significantly poorer after their relationships with Tyler ended. One had died under suspicious circumstances, a fall in her bathroom that left her with fatal head injuries. Another had suffered a heart attack after discovering her bank accounts had been emptied. The third had survived but lost her life savings and her will to live. The investigator also found Tyler's sister, who told them about lending him her daughter Sophie for his acting job. The little girl had described the game in detail, pretending to be Tyler's daughter, calling the nice lady Miss Ellie, helping Uncle Tyler make the lady happy so she would give him money to take care of Sophie. When confronted with the evidence, the FBI took over the case. 8 months after Eleanor's death, Tyler Brooks was arrested at a casino in Atlantic City, where he'd been living under the name Ryan Davidson and losing Eleanor's money as fast as he could count it. The charges were murder in the first degree, fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence was overwhelming. Pharmacy records showing online purchases of blood-thinning medication. bank records showing suspicious financial activity, medical records showing Eleanor's blood work on the day she died, security footage from the estate showing Tyler on the staircase the morning of Eleanor's death, and a 7-year-old witness who could describe exactly how Uncle Tyler had taught her to pretend to be his daughter. But the strongest evidence was Tyler himself. When confronted with the facts, he didn't deny them, didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't claim innocence. Instead, he shrugged and said, "She was going to die anyway. I just helped it happen a little faster. And she was happy when she died. Isn't that worth something?" It wasn't. The trial of Tyler Brooks lasted 4 weeks. Not because the crime was particularly complex. Men killing women for money happens disturbingly often in America, but because of the details. The fake identity, the borrowed child, the elderly victim who'd thought she'd found love in her golden years. Tyler's public defender tried to argue that Eleanor's death was genuinely accidental, that the blood thinner levels could be explained by medication error, that the oil on the stays was circumstantial evidence, that a 7-year-old's testimony about pretend games wasn't reliable. But the prosecution had more than circumstantial evidence. They had a pattern of behavior. They had financial records. They had medical experts who explained exactly how someone could commit murder using prescription medication. Most importantly, they had motive. Tyler Brooks had a documented history of targeting older women for financial gain. The prosecution brought in his previous victims, the ones who'd survived, to testify about his methods, his lies, his ability to make lonely women believe they were loved. He didn't kill Eleanor Mitchell for passion or anger, the prosecutor told the jury in closing arguments. He killed her for money. Cold, calculated, premeditated murder disguised as romance. She thought she was buying love. He was selling death. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Tyler showed no emotion when the verdict was read. No tears, no outrage, no remorse. He sat in his orange jumpsuit and stared straight ahead like a man watching television. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 30 years for the fraud charges. "Mr. Brooks," the judge said, "you didn't just kill Eleanor Mitchell. You killed her trust, her joy, her belief that people could be good. You took a woman who had survived poverty, widowhood, and heartbreak, and you turned her hope against her. There is no punishment severe enough for what you've done, but this court will ensure you never have the opportunity to do it again." Tyler was transferred to Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina's maximum security facility. He was 36 years old. If he lived to be 100, he would still die behind bars. He spent most of his time in protective custody, reading romance novels and writing letters to women he found on prison pen pal websites. Even behind bars, Tyler Brooks was still running the same con. Some of the women wrote back. Sophie, the little girl who'd been used as a prop in Tyler's deadly charade, was placed in therapy to help her understand that the game she'd played had contributed to a real person's death. Her mother moved across the country and changed their names, hoping to give her daughter a chance at a normal life away from the shadow of her uncle's crimes. The case became a cautionary tale, featured in documentaries and true crime podcasts, a reminder that predators often wear the faces of the people we most want to trust. But perhaps the most important lesson of Eleanor Mitchell's story is this: loneliness is not a crime, but it can make us vulnerable to those who would commit them. The desire to be loved, to be wanted, to feel young and beautiful again. These are not weaknesses to be ashamed of. They are human needs that deserve to be met with genuine care, not exploited by those who see kindness as an opportunity for profit. Eleanor Mitchell deserved better than Tyler Brooks. She deserved better than a man who saw her wealth before he saw her worth, who calculated the value of a life in dollars and cents, who turned her greatest fear, dying alone, into the weapon he used to kill her. But in the end, justice was served. Tyler Brooks will spend the rest of his life in a concrete cell, his charm useless, his schemes meaningless, his victims finally safe from his manipulations. He thought he was smart enough to get away with murder, but he learned that some crimes leave trails that can't be covered, no matter how carefully you plan. The loneliness that made Eleanor vulnerable to Tyler's lies also made her death matter to people who'd never met her. Her story resonated because we all know that feeling of wanting to be chosen, of hoping that someone will see us as worth loving. Tyler Brooks preyed on that universal human need, but he also ensured that his crimes would be remembered, investigated, and ultimately punished. In the end, Eleanor Mitchell got something Tyler Brooks never expected to give her: justice. And Tyler Brooks got something he never expected to receive: a life sentence that ensured he'd never hurt another lonely heart again. If this story affected you, if it made you think about the people in your life who might be vulnerable to predators like Tyler Brooks, then Eleanor Mitchell's death wasn't in vain. Share this story, hit that like button, and subscribe for more true crime content that matters. Because sometimes the most important stories are the ones that remind us to protect each other, to trust our instincts, and to remember that when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. Stay safe out there, trust your gut, and remember, real love doesn't come with a price tag, and anyone who tries to put one on it isn't worth your time, your money, or your heart.